Thank you. Uh, Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome members and officers to this Council Tax Setting Committee and welcome to anyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed, I'd like to invite the committee member and scrutiny officer to conduct a roll call of officers joining via Zoom. Susan.
Good evening. Can I confirm the following officers joining remotely can hear us and that we can hear them? Joe Dufficy.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Mark Scans.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. And Geraldine Goodwin.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. Are there any other officers in attendance remotely tonight that I haven't called out? When voting is required, votes will be cast using the yes, no, abstain buttons on the microphone units. A recorded vote is required for one of the items on this evening's agenda, and this will be conducted via the Auditel voting system, so no roll call to vote will take place as had previously, and details of how members voted will be published with the minutes. Are there any questions? Oh, hand back to the chair.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. We are all here this evening. That's great. So no apologies required. Minutes of the 28th of February 2023. I propose that we take and read and approve as a true record the minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of February 2023. Could I have a seconder for that? Councillor Dennis, second. Yep. Thank you. Is there any debate on that? Can't see any hands. Can we move to the result? Can we move to the vote? We haven't moved to the result just quite yet.
The chair, that motion is carried.
Cheers, thank you for that. Notification of other business. There's been no notification of other business. In accordance with council policy, this meeting is being audio recorded as well as filmed. The audio recordings will be available to view on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speaking rights is set out under Chair's announcements on the agenda. For the purposes of clarification, in order to vote on an agenda item at this meeting, a member must be present for the entirety of the debate and consideration of that item. If a member leaves the room at any point of the item, they will not be able to vote. Public participation, there is none, which then moves us to item 6 on the agenda, Council Tax Base 24-25, and the Service Director for Customers, Joe Dufficy, to present. Joe.
Thank you. So, good evening. You have before you the annual report that comes to this committee as part of the council tax setting process. There are two elements to it, setting the tax base and setting the non-collection rate. I'll start with the tax base. So this is a statutory requirement to set a tax base each year so that levels of council tax for the coming financial year can be set by precepting authorities. The process is set out in statute and requires a formal resolution. The process for calculating the tax base is the same for all councils, and the tax base is established by calculating the equivalent number of Band D properties in the district. As detailed in 2.2, the tax base calculation for 24-25 is 50,562.6. This is a decrease of 101 or 0.2%. The decrease is largely due to the changes that have been made to the council tax reduction scheme. As a result of the scheme providing greater support for those on lower incomes, the value of council tax reduction awards has increased, which in turn reduces the equivalent number of Band D properties. Appendix A shows the breakdown for each town and parish, and Appendix B shows an example of how the tax base is calculated. In this example, for Letchworth, you can see that we start with 15,281 dwellings in the list, and that number reduces as the numbers of exemptions and discounts are applied. As we calculate this separately for each parish and town, we repeat this exercise to reach an overall total for the district. So I'll move on to the non-collection rate part of this. So the recommendation as at 2.1 is to set the non-collection rate at 1%, as with previous years. We have traditionally had a very high collection rate of above 99%. It's worth noting this is our overall collection rate, and it's different to in-year collection, as council tax is not always collected in the same year which it is due. Looking at our current in-year collection rate, the profile target is 81.5%, and at the end of December, we were at 81.47%. It has been above target up until this point, and it does typically dip slightly during December. Despite this, it is slightly higher than December 22, so not a cause for concern. On that note, also worth pointing out that we have a number of customers that choose to pay over 12 instalments rather than the standard 10, which obviously impacts on the in-year collection rate. But ultimately, collection remains high, above 99%, hence that recommendation. I'll pause there in case there's any questions at that point.
Thanks, Joe. Are there any questions from colleagues? Looking around the room, can't see any questions. There are two recommendations in front of us that the committee has recommended to set a non-collection rate of 1% for 24-25. The committee has recommended to set the council tax base for 24-25 at 50,562.6, and that the individual sums shown in Appendix A for each parish be agreed. In accordance with the Constitution Standing Order 4.8.16 I propose that the recommendations as outlined are moved to a recorded vote. Could I have a seconder for that proposal? Councillor Dennis, thank you. Move to any debate on that proposal. I can't see any debate. If then we could move to the vote on this, colleagues.
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. And that moves us then to item 7, which is the National Non-Domestic Rate Return, the NNDR1. And again, Service Director for Customs, Joe Duffy, to present. Joe.
Thank you. So this one is another statutory return which must be submitted by the 31st of January each year. This return is the best estimate of NNDR to be collected in the following year. It enables us to calculate any surplus or deficit expected and the amount of NNDR that will be retained locally. The form traditionally follows the government's autumn statement and is amended each year to take into consideration any changes to business rates that may have been made in that statement. We have a challenge with this particular return and report every year, as we typically receive the final version of the return form in January. This year, this was on the 8th of January. And then dependent on what changes are required, we have to get our software supplier to amend any parameters in our system so that we can accurately extrapolate the data. And once completed, the form then has to go to our finance team and it's reviewed by LG Futures externally before it can be returned and submitted. That review with LG Futures took place earlier today. So the actual NNDR return was uploaded only today, and I appreciate that members may not have had an opportunity to have a look at that in detail. This obviously, as I said at the beginning, does present a challenge for us and in terms of getting the report uploaded, hence my comment a moment ago about it just being uploaded today. So for this reason, we include the recommendation at 2.3 of any further amendments that may be required before this is submitted on the 31st of January be delegated to myself, Ian Cooper, in conjunction with you, Chair. If it's okay, I'll pause at this point and invite Mark Skeins to add any further comment he may have to this paper.
Thanks, Joe. Mark, is there anything further you want to add?
Sorry about that, Joe. Technology problems. Just to explain that the form is quite different from previous forms announced by the Chancellor in the budget in November. The national non-domestic rate multiplier this year has been separated to account for the small business rate relief multiplier, which wasn't increased this year. And it now includes every property under 51,000, regardless of any previous legislation. The main multiplier was increased this year. It's gone up from 51.4 to 54.7, which is quite an increase, but that's to compensate for the lack of the small business rate relief multiplier going up. This is the second year of the third year of the transitional scheme, so we are paying less transition out to support people than we were last year, and that's reflected in what our gross rates or net rates payable will be. I point out to the members, of course, this is an estimate of our expected income from business rates next year. This changes. This is an income based on the 31st of December, and this, of course, changes on the 1st of January. However, we take all changes only from the 31st of December. So at present, it is a fair reflection of what we expect to collect in business rates through 24-25.
Thanks, Mark. Are there any questions from colleagues? Can't see any round the room. So we've got 3 recommendations there that the 2.1 that draft NNDR1 to be submitted is approved, that it be noted the second draft version of the NNDR was sent to councils by the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities on Monday the 8th of January. The final version of the NNDR1 will need to be returned to DLUC by Wednesday the 31st of January 2024. That the committee delegates any amendments to the return resulting from changes to the form and any additional guidance to the Service Director for Customers in consultation with the Service Director for Resources and myself as the committee chair of this committee. I'm happy to propose that from the chair. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Dennis, thank you. Is there any debate on this? If not, could we move to the vote?
Chair, that motion is carried.
Thank you very much. That concludes the business of the meeting. Thanks very much to officer colleagues for their input and all their work they're doing on this. It's a lot to do and a very complex, and obviously thanks to members attending here this evening. I formally close the meeting. Thanks, colleagues.